Good evening, everyone. Hello. Yay. You don't have to clap. It's okay. My name is Melanie McNair. I'm the Senior Director of Public Programming here at the Center for Fiction. How many of you are visiting us for the first time this evening? Oh, wow. So many of you. Welcome. We are a home for readers and writers here in Brooklyn, and it's really easy to get here if you don't live in Brooklyn, because the Atlantic is right there. If you want to know, we're the only literary nonprofit that focuses on the creation and enjoyment of fiction, but we also celebrate storytelling in all forms. And this room is a great space for conversations with cultural innovators. So we're very excited for the event tonight. Please sign up for our mailing list and do all those things so you don't miss anything that's happening here. A few housekeeping announcements. We will have an audience Q&A tonight. And if you're here, please raise your hand and one of our fabulous interns will bring a microphone to you so that the people who are watching on the live stream can also hear your question. And if you're on the live stream, also hello and welcome. You may type your question in the chat at any time and we will read that before the Q&A ends. When the event is over, you may purchase books in the bookstore using your vouchers, and then come back in here up the center aisle to get your books personalized. V was kind enough to pre-sign them all, so if a signing is enough for you, you're good to go. All right, let me introduce our wonderful guests this evening. I want to start by saying that tonight is the 100th episode of the Now What podcast. And we're thrilled to welcome the creator and host, Carole Zimmer, here. She's an award-winning journalist who has worked at National Public Radio, the NBC Radio Network, and Bloomberg News, where she served as a reporter and producer for 15 years. She's also the recipient of numerous awards, including a 2022 Clarion given by the Association of Women in Communications for the Now What episode, Ricki Lake Reinvents Herself. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, New York Magazine, and other publications. And she has also performed in stand-up comedy clubs. She's joined in, of course, here with V, formerly Eve Ensler, the Tony Award-winning playwright and author of the Obie Award-winning theatrical phenomenon, The Vagina Monologues, which has been translated into 48 languages, performed in 140 countries and probably in counting, along with many other plays. She's the author of a number of books, including her latest bestsellers, The Apology, and In the Body of the World, as well as the New York Times bestseller, I Am an Emotional Creature. She starred in Broadway in The Good Body and most recently off-Broadway at Manhattan Theater Club in the critically acclaimed In the Body of the World. She helped create The Kindness, Nurses in Their Own Words, presented by Brooklyn Academy of Music, our neighbors, in accordance with theaters all across the country, a tribute to nurses during the COVID-19 pandemic. She's currently writing the story and co-writing lyrics for a musical fable called Wild that made its world premiere in December 2021 at the American Repertory Theater. Film credits include The Vagina Monologues on HBO, What I Want My Words to Do to You, executive producer, and City of Joy, a documentary on Netflix. She's the founder of V-Day, the 24-year-old global activist movement, which has raised over $120 million to end violence against all women, cisgender and transgender, gender diverse, and girls, and the planet. And founder of 1 Billion Rising, the largest global mass action to end gender-based violence in over 200 countries, as well as co-founder of City of Joy. She also writes regularly for The Guardian. We're going to show you a little video, and then they're going to come onto the stage. So save your applause for right after the video, okay?
I'm Carole Zimmer. You know, it is hard for me to believe that Now What is celebrating its 100th episode. That's the podcast, not my age.
My first guest was Gloria Steinem. We talked about feminism, and she showed me the treasures that she's picked up from her travels around the world. That was almost 8 years ago.
I am so proud that you have reached 100th episode, and that you and I are still alive to be on it. It's a benefit of aging to be on this 100th episode of yours, because it gives me a sense of progress and completion and continuing.
It's hard to get the best guests. I've searched for people with inspiring stories. Sometimes I even chase them down the street. That's how I met Nikki Vreeland, a guy in burgundy robes who gave up a fancy life to become a revered monk in the Tibetan tradition. I talked to Norman Lear in his Beverly Hills office, which is filled with memories from his long career. Lear was 95 and going strong.
I am here.
You're here.
I am here. That's, I think, an important attitude toward longevity, and enjoying the mystery of it.
One of my all-time favorite guests is V. She's been on this podcast more than anyone else, starting at the time when she was known as Eve Ensler, and before she'd written her best-selling new book, Reckoning. V is an innovator, a rule breaker, a woman who's not afraid to tell hard truths. It was 27 years ago that she broke new ground with the Vagina monologues, which has since been performed in more than 140 countries.
I was worried about vaginas. I was worried what we think about vaginas, and I was even more worried that we don't think about them.
V has also performed in the stage version of her play In the Body of the World, which tells the harrowing story of the cancer that nearly took her life. She has spent a lot of time in the Democratic Republic of the Congo on a project that's touched the lives of thousands of women who were raped in the country's ongoing wars. That project is the City of Joy.
The magnitude of the stories were beyond anything I'd ever heard in my life.
I am so happy that we are here together to celebrate, to connect, to have a couple of laughs, and I thank you for joining us.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm very touched by all the support. The fact that V is here with me is a thrill for me. I've known you for years, and you've had 3 or 4 lives before we even got here, and now there's a new one, and it's V. And I want to know why you changed your name.
Yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, I'm so happy to be with all of you tonight, and I just want to take a moment to honor this woman who has done such amazing journalism for so long. This is her 100th show. Come on. That was amazing. Really.
Oh,
really.
my goodness.
I was just thinking when you were saying how many lives I've had, just like a pussycat. My name, yes, the name. Well, you know, names are really intense things, right? They're markers, they're denominators, they're stains, they determine you, names. And it's hard to have a name like Eve, like as a 6-year-old. Eve did not bring a lot of very good things into the world you know, she was responsible for sin and death and, you know, horrible, you know, birth and I always felt it was a lot, you know. But what happened was, 2019, I was doing a lot of thinking about the fact that during the Me Too movement, when men were getting called out, I kept waiting for men to apologize. You know, I kept thinking, okay, there's going to be an onslaught of public apologies where men come forward and own their behavior and show how they're changing and going into therapy and doing this deep evaluation, and not a one public. So I kept thinking, this is very odd. And then I started to look in history, like, when have men ever apologized for, couldn't find one for any public apology for sexual abuse. And that, coupled with the fact that I would say, as a survivor of childhood sexual abuse and violence from my father, I think I waited every day, unconsciously, for the time when my father would wake up and apologize to me. There was going to come that moment when he was going to come to, when the veil was going to drop and he was going to see it and he would say, I'm sorry. And he died, and he never said, I'm sorry. He didn't even say goodbye. And I still waited. Even unconsciously, sometimes I would go to the mailbox and I would have this feeling like, oh my God, there's going to be that apology in the mail. And then I realized it wasn't coming. And I decided that I didn't want to wait for it anymore. I was going to write it. So I sat down and I wrote my father's apology to me. And I said all the things I needed him to say in his voice. So I had to climb inside him and live inside him for a treacherous period of time. And it was unbelievably painful, but it was unbelievably liberating. And at the end of it, the last line of the book is, old man, be gone. And literally, remember at the end of Peter Pan when Tinkerbell just goes shoop into the ethers? That's what happened. I felt my father go shoop. And he's really been gone ever since. And I realized afterwards that I had no more rancor, I had no more anger, I had no more pity, I had no more anything. But I didn't want a name from someone who hadn't had my best interest. I didn't want a name from someone who didn't love me. I didn't want a name from someone who tried to kill me. I wanted a name that would bring me into the next years of my life that was my name, and that would really end my attachment to that patriarchal lineage, that would be my patriarchal free name. And V's have been really good to me. I love everything about V's. First of all, they're just a beautiful letter. You know, they're shaped beautifully, they're openings, they're invitations, vaginas, vulvas, voluptuous. I mean, just so many good words begin with V's. And I felt like it would be my way of stepping into who I truly was. And I have to tell you that since I changed my name, I feel very, very different. I feel less beholden to patriarchy. I feel less beholden to prove myself, to search for recognition. I feel free. And I really recommend, you know, if your name has not sat right with you, throughout your life, to really think about it, because a name really determines a lot.
I may change it to C. It's possible.
There you go.
What would it stand for, though, C? Let's say. But, you know, as a person like who has an identity crisis every day, I'm like thinking, you just change your name and like that was a good thing. It didn't make you crazy. It kind of like liberated you. Yes. I ate a different kind of yogurt on Wednesday, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm like ruined for the rest of the week. But you are so, you can do it.
I feel like identity is always, it's always evolving, right? It's always fluid. It's always, I think that's what's so wonderful about what's happening now, like with gender, the expanse of gender, with the expanse of identity. It's a process of evolution. We're always evolving as human beings. So yeah, it was sad to let go of Eve, but not really, to be honest with you. And I like the fact that it's confusing to people. I like the fact that people are like, how could you let go of your name when people already knew you by it? Because I want to be known by this. Let's go into the next stage of being known by something, right? Let's not just hold on to that because it's already been determined.
You're very good at reinvention. I mean, you really, and you go with it, you know. And I asked you before about anxiety, and you said, I used to be anxious, but I'm like not anxious anymore. How did you do that?
Well, I'm not saying I'm anxiety free by any means. I mean, today I'm having, like, for example, a totally vulnerable day. You know, the day where you wake up without skin and you're like, oh, I don't have any skin today. And I, you know, and I just know on these days that I'm meant to be vulnerable, right? Part of, I think we live in this culture that is so afraid to be vulnerable, to be open, to say what we're really feeling, to say that we have a fear of not adding up, to say that we, you know, that I'm about to turn 70. That is a huge feeling. It's a threshold. And I'm not saying I don't like aging and any of that, but there's something in your body when you're moving towards 70 that you know you're crossing over into the last stages of your life. And that's real. And to not kind of meet that in some way and to say that's real and to then begin to think about death, which I'm doing a lot now, and what is death, and reading everything I can about death, because that's the next big adventure, as far as I can tell. But I think anxiety is an interesting thing. I think for me, so much of my anxiety was wrapped up in being inside my father's narrative. You know, I think anytime you're up against someone, even if you're saying to yourself that you don't care what they think, but everything I used to do was to show my father I was smart and he was wrong, that I wasn't stupid. To prove to my father I added up to something. I was still living in my father's story. I was still living his story, right? Once I stopped that, a lot of the anxiety went away because it wasn't about having to prove myself to my father anymore.
Well, your story is beyond beyond most people's stories. It's an amazing story. I want to go back to this. In 2017, when I talked to you, you kind of alluded to this idea about sexual abuse, but we kind of went over it. And then you wrote the apology. And it was about being sexually abused by your father from the time you were 5 years old. Mm-hmm. And I was like, 5 years old? I mean, how could that be, you know? And that went on from like 5 to 10 when you were like, no more of that. What was that experience? And 5 is so young. Do you really remember that?
Well, you know, I think it's interesting. I spent the morning, I don't know if any of you have seen the play Prima Facie yet. That's on Broadway with Jodie Comer, but it's a wonderful play, and it's written by a woman named Susie Miller, who's a barrister, and who was a barrister in Australia, and then she was doing a lot of sexual abuse cases, and then she got raped by another barrister, and the play is about what happens to her. And we were all talking, I did a panel this morning that we filmed to support it so people can think about the issues in the play. But one of the things I was thinking about is, you know, I wish my experience of being sexually abused when I was 5 years old was an anomaly. I wish it wasn't something that was normal. In fact, it's terribly normal. There's many girls who are abused when they're children. There is so much childhood sexual abuse, girls and boys. And I think it's still the thing we don't want to talk about. It began to emerge in the 80s when people were really beginning to talk about it, and then there became this whole pushback called the false memory syndrome. Do you remember? When the right started pushing back and saying everyone was making things up and it really wasn't happening, and then therapists were being threatened with lawsuits, so they stopped really pushing and examining the way they had been. You know, it was obviously a seminal experience. It shaped my life. It determined so much of me. I think when you're invaded by a person you love, and my father had adored me up to that point and then crossed this line, your confusion of intimacy and love and all those things get completely messed up and the borders get completely blurry. And then what happened is my father, when that stopped, he became very, very violent, I think to prove to my mother that he really didn't love me and had no interest in me. So he was constantly doing very, very violent things. And I think so much of my childhood was shaped by that violence. I sometimes feel like I'm a consequence of violence, you know. I never felt safe, I never felt rooted, I never felt loved, I never felt that anybody was protecting me. And a wonderful woman named Kanyora, who runs End Rape on college campuses, was saying this morning that when we were talking about what's your vision of a world without patriarchy, she said, a world that's safe, a world that's safe for everybody, where you can walk and be and live in safety. And I think I never had any sense of safety as a child. I was always waiting for something to invade me, to hit me, to throw me. So that made me who I was. And I think there's part of me that has gratitude for it in a weird way, because it allowed me access. I'm not afraid of things that other people are afraid of. Do you know what I mean? So much already happened to me as a child that I've spent a lot of time in war zones. I've spent a lot of time in rape camps. I've spent a lot of time in refugee camps. It feels like what my family was like, to be honest with you. So it feels like I can hear those stories and be there and listen.
I get that, but you were part of a family unit. There was a mother, you had 2 siblings. Your father apparently was only interested in you and not either of your other siblings. And there was a mother. Did nobody do anything?
No.
Were you alone with your father in this really crazy and tragic situation? What was the rest of the family unit doing?
But it was the 50s. No one even talked about this kind of thing. No one thought about this kind of thing. I mean, my mother, my mother has said to me later on, she said to me, which I found very moving, she said, when I finally confronted her years later, she said, I sacrificed you. I was a woman who was very poor. I grew up in the Midwest. I had no job capabilities whatsoever. I had 3 children. Where was I going? Where was I going to go with 3 children? Where was I going to take them? And look, I can be angry at my mother for not protecting me, but I also do understand there are economic realities and things that shape our lives. And the truth of the matter is, my mother was brought up in patriarchy. She was brought up to serve men, to believe in men, to say the man is always right, to listen to her husband. The feminist revolution hadn't occurred. Like, she was still within that period. So I don't have a lot of blame anymore. I think this was just the situation. Would I have liked a mother who protected me? Of course. But that's done. That's done.
You survived. You got out of there. You went to college. Your 20s were pretty wild. Drugs, alcohol, sex. I don't know what else. Anorexia. Probably some more thrown in. How did you go from that to writing the vagina monologues? You were a chambermaid, you were a waitress. Where's that arc? Where did it come from?
So, it's really interesting. I was thinking about this the other day, how do we survive? Like if I look back when I was in my 20s, I was in such despair. I had so much anxiety. I had so much self-hatred. I would end up in the hospital with anxiety attacks all the time. And I think for me, it was through the intervention of certain people in my life who arrived at these incredible moments like angels who took me under their wings. 12-step programs saved my life, absolutely. But I'll tell you a wonderful story. When I was 23 years old, I was with a man, and he had a son who was as messed up as I was. He was 15 and I was 23. And I just adored him. He was just the most adorable teenager and completely wild. And I completely related to him. So his father had not raised him. He had watched his mother be murdered when he was 5 years old. He was a complete mess. But I was like, I love that boy. And I'm going to raise that boy. And I'm going to learn how to love that boy. And so I adopted him. And
you were 23.
I was 23.
He was
15.
16, 15.
And I adopted him. And really loving him is how I grew my own self up, because I had to be together to love him. And by the way, he's a wonderful actor who I'm sure you've seen. His name is Dylan McDermott, and he's in FBI Most Wanted right now. And he's a wonderful human being. But okay, so we had this adventure, and he went, and I said, 2 things you're going to do. You're going to go to therapy, and you're going to go to acting school, because that will make you learn how to deal with your emotions. So he went to this acting school, and one of his acting teachers was Joanne Woodward. Okay, I had this passionate crush on Joanne Woodward because she'd been in the movie Sybil. Do you remember Sybil? Mm. And she played the therapist to the woman who had 9 personalities, who I felt very identified with. And she called her sweetie all the time, and she would say, sweetie, come. And I just dreamed that Joanne Woodward would come into my life and call me sweetie. It was my ongoing dream of a mother. Okay, so she's at Dylan's school, she's teaching him, and I had written this play, and I said, why don't you just show her my play? By the way, it was a play called Coming from Nothing, about a woman who couldn't remember the first 10 years of her life but needed help to get there, okay? This was long before all the memories came flushing back. So she read the play, and she said, oh, I love this play, I'm going to have it done in my class. And we became friends. So I was in a kind of bold stage, and I was very active in the anti-nuclear movement. And I said, why don't I write you a play about activists in the anti-nuclear movement? And she said, well, why don't you write me some speeches first? So I wrote some speeches, and she said, I like these, write me the play. So I wrote her the play, and I remember the first draft, I gave it to her, and she said, the character's really good, and the structure's really good, but it's not funny. You have to make it funny. I said, it's a play about nuclear war. She said, you have to make it funny. You know, there's no way we can, and she taught me so much about when you are doing political work, you have to deliver it with humor, and you have to deliver it so it's not on the head, but from the side, move it in. And so I wrote it, rewrote it, and then finally she said, I'm going to direct it, and we're going to get Shirley Knight. I don't know if you all knew Shirley Knight, but Shirley Knight was an unbelievable actress. So here I was at 24 years old, working with Joanne Woodward and Shirley Knight. It was, and all I remember is they were always on diets eating rice cakes. You know, we were just sitting in rehearsal. But I will tell you something, those women changed my life. They shaped my life because they believed in me, they loved what I was doing, they pushed me, they criticized me, everything. And we ended up writing, I wrote this play and Shirley performed it, and we toured America for 2 years. We went to military academies, and we did it for Congress, and we did it at the Nevada test site and got arrested. We did it everywhere. And that was the beginning of my career. And it was because Joanne, I mean, I could just weep saying this, saw something in me that I obviously didn't see in myself, but she reached down and she just kind of pulled me out of my morass, as did Shirley, and they sent me off in another direction, which is why it's so important in our lives when we see the people around us who have talent or who have that thing in their eye or have the desire to fulfill themselves, that we just lift them up. We give them direction, we give them support, we give them tending, because that tending, we have no idea what it will do for people down the, you talk to most people who have had difficult lives, and it's 1 or 2 people who came into their lives at that moment and just kind of lifted them up.
I'm still back with the dirty hair. I always had dirty, depressing hair, and I thought that is such a description of having a life where you feel like, who am I? What am I doing here? Why is this happening to me? That was before Joanne Woodward.
Oh yeah, that was before. That was when I was younger. I think all of those sad girls, who are the desperate girls who aren't popular, who are left out, who are excluded, we always have sad, dirty hair, and we just can't function, so that was just part of that wave. And I don't know. I look at kids who, I was seeing a movie the other night where some kid just got, they were pretending to be his friend, and then when he believed them, they threw him down in the ground and they threw him in the mud. There's something about bullying. There's something about people excluding people that is so deeply disturbing to me because I was that person. And so in the long run, it's made me identify with just about everybody. I feel like in solidarity with any group that's been marginalized or outcast or excluded or not allowed in, because that was the shape of my life. So I don't really, there's nothing that's happened to me in my past any longer that I really begrudge. It's all been fuel. It's poison into medicine,
You worked on it. You really worked on it. And I remember reading this in Reckoning after your mother died. You found out that she had left you some odd assortment of things, Social Security, birth certificate, and there was a photo. There was a photo, and it was, what was it of, and who was it of, and what were you shocked?
Well, what's really strange is that she left me this very strange brown folder with kind of rubber ties around it, and I didn't open it for a very long time because I didn't really want to know what was in it. It really scared me. And when I did open it, there were all these strange things that she had kept, like my 5th grade report card. It was so random, like why 5th grade, right? But then at the bottom of the stack, there was a picture of me as a baby, and I was battered. And I had black eyes, and I had, cuts on my face, and it was so chilling to see this picture because I don't know if someone punched me, if my brother hit me, I don't know what it is, but it absolutely was a photograph of what I experienced, the interior world as a child. Like I felt like a battered baby. I always felt like a dirty, battered baby. That's what I felt like. And it was a very you know, a very shocking experience. And I kept thinking to myself, why would she leave me that picture? Like, what was my mother telling me? Like, what, you know, I was trying to read the tea leaves. Like, what was she saying, you know?
We talked about your 20s, and we talked about Joanne Woodward, and then there's the 40s, and there's the vagina monologues. You had interviewed a number of people, hundreds, actually, was it like 200 women talking about intimate parts of their body? Who talked about vaginas in the 1990s, you know, but you put together this theatrical, it became a sensation. I guess you'd say viral in these terms today. How did that happen? Did you feel incredibly brave to kind of go in that territory?
Well, it was really accidental. You know, I was already a very far downtown playwright. I was writing plays about homeless women and nuclear war, and you can imagine these weren't really popular. And so I accidentally got onto the subject of a good friend who was going through menopause, and she was a very forward-thinking woman, a feminist, and she started saying things about her vagina that were really shocking, like it's dried up, and it's prune-like, and it's finished, and it's dead. And I was like, wow. I just couldn't believe what she was saying. So and she was saying with such intensity and anger, you know? And so I thought, wow, what do other women think about their vaginas? And so I would just say to a friend casually, like, have you thought about your vagina? I mean, like, what do you think, you know? And the first woman I said it to said, my mother told me, don't wear underpants underneath your pajamas. You need to air out your pussycat. That was the first person, and I thought, wow, okay. And then it just began, you know, and you know how women are. Someone would say, oh, you should really talk to so-and-so. She has an amazing story about her vagina. And so I would talk to that person. And, but I had no plan to write a play about this, believe me. It would have secured my status downtown. And then I interviewed this woman who, and all the vagina monologues are fictional pieces. I want to be clear about that. I interviewed hundreds of women to get ideas and themes and things that repeated, but all of those pieces are fictional creations. But I interviewed this woman who had a terrible experience when she was a child with, you know, a young woman with a man, and she had never had sex again. Never. And I thought, you never had sex after that? And I couldn't bear that idea. It was just unbearable to me. So I said, well, I'm gonna write her story. I'm just gonna write this into a story. And I wrote The Flood, and then I wrote another piece. And then I tried it out in this cafe in the village called the Cornelia Street Cafe. And everyone was really excited. I was like, really? Okay. And then I just kept writing them. And then I was doing another play at a theater called Here in Lower Manhattan. And they said, why don't you take one night while you're doing a run of this other show and just try out the vagina monologues? Try out what you're doing. And I was like, really? Okay, that would be very scary. And so I did it, and there were maybe 50 people there. And there was this wonderful theater critic. I don't know if you remember Alexis Green. She used to do these wonderful, and she wrote a review of it. And it was this amazing review. And I thought, she reviewed this piece? And it inspired me. It encouraged me. It's probably the only time a critic has ever encouraged me in my life. And I felt like, oh my God. And so then I started to take it seriously. And you know, what is so amazing about the vagina monologues is, I just think it's true with any piece of art. Like, if you surrender yourself to it, it has its own trajectory, it has its own story, it has its own life. It will take you where it has to take you. And I feel like the Vagina Queens, I always make a joke about it. They came down, they were like looking for somebody, and they were like, exhibitionist, good. Bad history, good. Likes to listen to women, good. I mean, they just picked all the qualities, and then I was there to serve. And from the day I performed that piece at Here, from the first day, it was astonishing. It was astonishing. Women lined up every single night after that play in droves. And they had to tell me their story. They had to tell me their story. They had never told anyone their story. And so I would literally give people my phone number and my address, and I would schedule appointments. I felt like Dr. Ruth. People were coming in and out of my apartments for months. And I couldn't cut them off, because I knew these women had never told anybody these stories before. So I would just sit and listen and listen and listen. And I was so moved by what women had been through and what they were carrying and what they had gone through, and the fact that everything was a secret. Everything was like just stuck inside them. So it was such a privilege. It was the whole thing, I felt so honored that women trusted me with their stories, that women felt, safe enough to tell me their stories. And that was really the beginning of that whole journey.
It was an amazing journey. And now I want to go back to trauma, because I always love to go back to trauma. So we were talking before, at the beginning, 3-4 lives, many lives V has. And when you were 56, you were diagnosed with stage 3-4 uterine cancer. And it's a harrowing story. I read that book and I'm like, what? I mean, it had spread before you realized it. You had, I don't know how many organs removed. I was trying to look that up, but it was a lot. And it was a question of, am I going to survive? You had all of the treatment, and what was that like? I mean, you were plunged into the depths of this horrible illness.
It was incredible. It was 14 years ago, and it's funny when you get that announcement that you've got stage 3/4 uterine cancer, and it's spread to. It was so shocking because I had literally a tumor the size of a mango inside me, and I didn't know it, which is an indication to you all how deeply disembodied I was, and outside my body I was, that I wasn't even knowing what was going on. But as shocking as it was, and it was really shocking, it was the most profound experience of my life, because I have for so many years, I'd had moments when I performed the vagina monologues that I felt I had come back into my body. I could feel when you're raped as a child or when you're abused as a child, you leave your body because it is the landscape of terror and pain and holds the memories, it holds everything. So you leave, you become disembodied, and you kind of watch yourself throughout your life, like kind of hanging out up here. And when I performed the vagina monologues, I went through a process where I was beginning to start to re-enter, but I hadn't fully re-entered. And then I kind of went off into the world and spent a lot of time in war zones, and particularly my time in the Congo, where I had been invited by an extraordinary man named Dr. Denis Mukwege, who actually won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2019. And he is a gynecologist who was taking care of women in the Congo whose bodies were being eviscerated by mass rape. And he invited me to come, and because he said, no one will talk to me about vaginas, and no one will talk about what's happening to vaginas in Congolese women, and what's happening in this country, and would you come, and would you listen, and would you watch, and would you be with me, and would you hear the stories? And I went. And I had been in a lot of war zones at that point. I'd been in Bosnia, I'd been in Kosovo, I'd been in Haiti, I'd been in Afghanistan. But I will tell you, the conflagration and the intersectional reality of racism, colonialism, capitalism, because it's an economic war in Congo, where it's the richest country in all of Africa. Probably it would have been the most powerful country if the West hadn't robbed it of all its resources and destroyed its people. But that war was literally being fought on the bodies of women, because the coltan that we use in our phones and our iPhones and our PlayStations comes from the Congo. And so they were sending in militias into communities where they would rape the girls, or they would have fathers rape their daughters, or sons rape their mothers. It's just horrible, grotesque sexual abuse. And then the family would be destroyed and it would flee, and once the families fled, they would take over the mines that were in those communities. So it was being used as literally a way of getting economic profit. And when I went to the Congo, for me, it was so shocking. It was so of another world that I didn't even know how to talk about it. I actually haven't told 90% of what I've heard there to anyone, because it's so re-traumatizing just to tell those stories and just to say what is happening. But it was like the deepest wake-up call about where we are headed as a planet, that if we don't look at the intersection of colonialism and racism and economic extraction and exploitation and how these merge in a cauldron of devastation to the people who live in certain countries, I knew it would spread. And of course it has in the time, since then. But my experience in the Congo really was so profound in terms of my connecting and falling in love with the women there, and just understanding that I don't even know how to say this, that we're not separated in this world. Everything that we're doing is connected to somebody else somewhere. There's nothing we eat. There's nothing we put into wear on our bodies. There's nothing in the oil in our cars. It's all connected to somebody's either improvement or denigration, their uplift or their exploitation. And I don't even know what your question was.
I was talking about cancer.
Sorry, I just got lost.
Let me go back to the cancer, because I remember you saying, and this was something I was wondering about, you didn't think that this cancer was actually sort of like an accident of nature or whatever, but you blamed yourself because you said that you spent so much of your life disconnected from your body. Did you really think you had, by doing that, caused this cancer?
No, but I didn't take care of my body. I didn't love my body. I didn't see my body as a body. I saw it as a thing that I had to, almost surpass. Like I had to keep going. I was driven. I had to do. If it got in my way, I ignored it. If it felt sick, I just kept going. I didn't treat it like I was in it and a part of it at that point in my life. And I think that was part of why I got sick. But I think also, trauma is such an interesting thing. I was saying this the other day, like it doesn't have time. One of the reasons we were talking about the fact that the law and the way we talk about sexual abuse in terms of the law, when women speak of what's happened to their body, the sequential reality and time are very, very nonlinear, right? You can be talking about being raped at 5 years old, and you can be right there, right now, right? And in that story, in this moment, time becomes very fragmented, memory becomes very fragmented. And so I feel like I hadn't dealt with a lot of what had happened to me. And it was lodged in my body. It was there. It was grounds to, and I think as we evolve, we will come to see cancer and diseases as an extension of trauma, if not trauma itself. I think for me, I know that trauma is what grew that tumor, and I could feel it. And when I woke up from surgery, which was a 9-hour surgery that happened literally in 3 days after I got diagnosed, I woke up and I was missing 7 organs. I had 70 nodes. I had parts replaced, and I mean, really, it was. But amazingly, I was in my body. I had tubes coming out, I had bags coming out, and it was the first time in my life I was body. And I just kept saying, I'm a body. I'm a body. I'm in my body. This is my body. I have a body. And it was the beginning of like another whole new life for me, where for the first time in my life I began to connect to nature and understand that my body and nature were connected, that I'd always lived in the city, and I knew I had to move and be with trees and be with water and be with birds and be with all kinds of animals. Like I went through a radical transformation in my life. And I just want to say that I feel like the women I know in the Congo, we built, an amazing thing happened was that I had made a commitment to work with the women in the Congo to build the City of Joy, because we had spent months, Christine Schuler-Descriver and I, who is the director of City of Joy and an unbelievable warrior and activist. And she and Dr. Mukwege and I became partners to build this, but I had promised that I would raise the money and I would be there to build the City of Joy. And I got sick just as the building started. And I will say the thing that absolutely kept me alive was my promise to finish the City of Joy. So I always say the women of Congo saved my life, because they did. And I'll never forget when I went back to open City of Joy, and I was 40 pounds thinner than I am now, and I was bald, and I looked really like a really scary white woman. And when I got there, the women they just surrounded me, and they started to dance. And they danced, and they danced, and they danced, and they danced. And it was like one of those moments when you just feel like, okay. And I realized every woman who was dancing like that had been raped severely, and probably re-raped. But whatever spirit was in that woman's body, whatever was happening in her body, was so much higher, was so much more intense than what had happened. And I thought that's when 1 Billion Rising evolved. So I just thought, what if we got 1 billion women to dance like this on the planet on the same day, and to say no to violence, right? And that's what kind of evolved that whole idea.
I know we're going to break for questions and answers, but I really want to go back to your mother just for a minute, because this was a really touching part of Reckoning for me. You talk about going to Florida, where your mother lived, and you were sitting on her couch with the Oriental pillows, and you were confronting her about what your father had done, and her unwillingness to protect you, and you always felt so unprotected in your childhood. Could you read just that little section on page 168 where you talked about, it's the first paragraph, and setting that up?
Yeah. It's from a chapter called Keep Us Fed that I wrote in Paris in 1995. Perhaps it is because, although it surprised her, it didn't really surprise her at all. She said, sexual molestation? Couldn't be. First words like someone punched her in the stomach. I know he was violent towards you, Eve, very violent, but he wouldn't do that. Then something rose up in me, a voice, a strength. I said, Mother, when I get finished, if when you hear what I have come to tell you, if then you choose not to believe me, well, that is your choice. I have no control over that. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because this happened to me, because it wrecked my life. And I've been recovering from it for almost 40 years. You need to know what happened, because now there is a lie between us, and that lie has prevented our love.
I was really moved by that. And I have to say that to me, this is you. This is what you stand for, your message. We can face the worst that life has in store for us and create, even in the face of terror, a life of meaning and joy. And to me, that's what you represent.
Thank you. Thank you, Carole. I just want to say something about facing things. You know, sometimes I think I should just get a T-shirt that says trigger warning, because I feel like I am your worst trigger, and kind of proud of it. And I'm not to say that I don't think people should take care of themselves when they're dealing with difficult things. But we live in a country, in a culture, that has diabolical amnesia, that does not want to confront its past, that does not want to look at the ground that we stand on that was stolen from the indigenous people who lived here, that doesn't want to look at 500 years of slavery and Jim Crow and mass incarceration and everything that's followed that, the ongoing police murders, the ongoing killings of Black people. We don't want to look at our story because it brings up too many difficult feelings for us. And I just want to say the reason I wrote this book called Reckoning is because I believe that during the pandemic, something began to happen in this country. We began to reckon. And we began to see it happen everywhere. We began to reckon with the fact that we don't have a healthcare system that in any way takes care of the majority of people in this country. We don't have a healthcare system that loves our nurses, that takes care of them, and our doctors and all the people who serve us. We don't have anything in this country a way of reckoning with the fact that there are 20 or 30 people who have most of the money while people are starving everywhere. We were beginning to reckon. And then what happened is there was this huge pushback, which we're in the middle of right now, trying to ban books and cancel ideas and cancel critical race theory and cancel anti-racism training and cancel trans rights and cancel. And we have to fight that, because this country will die if we do not face our past, if we do not remember where we come from and transform it through our reckoning, through our apology, through our reparations. We will become a violent, disordered, what we're becoming. And I have to say that we have to be triggered, all of us. Being triggered is where the door opens, where you feel uncomfortable, where you want to weep, where you want to throw up, where you want to feel terrible about what has been done in your name as a white person, what has been done in your name as a man, we need to feel that in order to change. That is part of our process. And I feel it really strongly right now, because I think we're all getting very afraid. We're all stepping back and saying, well, maybe we don't have to remember. We do. We do. Because I know from my own personal experience, and I've seen it, every woman I've ever supported or been part of hearing her story, that when you tell the truth about what happened to you, and when you confront the person who's done it to you, real change happens. And all of those molecules, those karmic, microbial, I can call it as sludge, that live in our atmosphere, they break apart, and there is space for us to begin to connect and love each other. So
I would like to say you heard it here. She's running for president in 2024. Okay. So we have time for some questions, and if you would like to ask a question, there will be people who will come to you with a microphone.
You can just raise your hand and we'll come over to you with a microphone, and if you're listening on YouTube, just feel free to put your questions in the chat.
Don't hold back. You can have comments too. So, yes.
Did you ever confront your father about the abuse?
My father, no, I never confronted him about the sexual abuse. I did attempt to confront him about the physical abuse, which was disastrous, because my father believed that anything he did I deserved, and I made happen, right? And my father basically stopped talking to me many years before he died. So I never had that moment to, speak to him. But I'll tell you something, writing the book, I learned something about the dead, about our ancestors. They're all around us. They're all around us. And when I made the decision to write the apology, my father really showed up. He was present through the writing of this entire book. He would actually wake me up at 4 a.m. and tell me to go to my study, because he would tell me things that I never knew. And I feel like my father's in a much better place since I wrote that book. I think he was in some realm that was not a good realm, and I think he moved on. I could feel it by the end of this book, but no, I did not confront him.
I love that you named yourself, but I couldn't help but think, how much more complexity have you created in your life to deal with everyday things with a name like V?
How much more complexity? It doesn't feel that more complex. It feels, I always joke, I'm down to a letter and soon I'll be nothing, It feels light, It feels like, the interesting thing about identity is, it's so everything and then it's nothing. It's so essence and then it's both. And I feel like I like the idea of, I was reading this beautiful drag queen today who was talking about why we do drag. And he was saying such a beautiful thing. He was saying that we're here to try on things. We're here to try on different ways of being, to find ourselves through performance, to find ourselves through clothes, to find ourselves through all the different ways that we evolve. And I think I like that idea, that identity is something you're always experimenting with, and if you want to stay attached to one and you happen to find the one that you think is it for life, great. But I also love the fact that we get to keep experimenting, and maybe when I'm 80, I'll change my name again. Who knows? Then there'll be something. I love these young kids. I've been doing these workshops with young LGBTQ youth, and they change their name every class. You know, last week they were Threat. This week they're Adam. You know, it's like, and I think it's fantastic. You know, just break the rules. Who made these rules? You know, people who wanted to keep us in a place so they could, you know, do what they had to do to us, you know. Come on, there must be other questions. There's one, yeah.
Forgive me for going back there, but your siblings, did you ever have conversations with them? And I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, I don't talk about my siblings a lot because I feel like it's their story to tell. Yes, we did. I don't really have that much contact with my siblings, to be honest. I think when you grow up in a very, 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 very violent family, it's sort of like growing up in a camp of sorts. You know what I mean? Like a bad camp, you know, a refugee camp, or and I think it's just too painful for all of us. But I will say, when I wrote the apology, I sent it to my brother, and I asked them both if they wanted to read it before it went to press. And he wrote me a beautiful letter where he said, maybe finally people will know who they were. And he was grateful and was really honoring of what I had done. So that made me very happy. I think there's one back there, yeah.
Hi, V. You talked a little bit about your experience in sending your adopted son to therapy. I'm wondering if you've had any experiences of your own with therapy that you'd be willing to speak to. Yeah, I figured.
You think? Oh no, I never went to therapy. Just skipped right through. Just did it all on my own.
That was another persona.
I think I've done every kind of therapy there is in humankind. But I'll tell you something really interesting. You know, I feel like everything I've tried in my life to get better, to be able to function, to not walk the world and feel totally unworthy and so much self-hatred that I can't even get out of bed in the morning, or to always feel like comparing myself and coming up short, you know. I think if someone tells you every day of your life that you're stupid, it's very, very hard to beat that in your lifetime. You have to really work hard. I think every bit of therapy, everything that I tried, helped me in some way or another, right? Like it got me through this, or it brought me into my body, or it made me aware, like Alice Miller. I remember my days of Alice Miller, like, oh my God, Judith Herman. I can just, all the different people that I read. But I will tell you, the thing that helped me the most was doing plant medicine. Because, I will share why. When you are a survivor of enormous violence, it lives in your body. It lives in your body. And literally, stories occupy your cells, your organs, your beings. They live there. And when you do plant medicine, you can get down to that level of your unconscious where you can actually remove them, where you can actually get them out of your system so they don't keep repeating their trauma and their story in your system. And I think if you work with people who know how to do it, it's really, really powerful. But I think anything that you do, if you're a survivor of sexual violence, where you move your body, where you work on your body, where you get the anger, where you get the stuckness, where you get whatever's been charged into you, where you learn how to release it, you begin to get better, you know? And I think, frankly, if I had my dream of the country we have, everyone in this country would stop what they were doing, and we would focus on the de-traumatizing of our country for a good 5 years. And we think about, how do we do that? How do we help everybody in this country heal from the amount of trauma they have gone through in the various ways they've been traumatized? Because just even the gun situation, I mean, the fact that we have 400 million guns and 20 million assault rifles. 20 million assault rifles. We have more guns in the population than we do in the police force or the army. I mean, that is so telling about this culture. It's so telling about not dealing with pain, not dealing with hurt, not dealing with trauma. You know, it metastasizes into, you know, hardened tears become bullets, right?
We have time for potentially one more question from our live audience, and then one from our live stream audience. I'll start with the live stream question while folks are thinking. From Nicholas Holland, in your opinion, what are the biggest roadblocks for improving sexual education in this country? What can we do at home?
Oh, I so appreciate that question. I think one of the biggest reasons why patriarchy still exists is because of how our kids are brought up around sex. We were talking this morning, I think it's 90% of boys learn about sex from porn, right? And I mean, just that thought is just so mind-blowing, right? I think what we did is we conceded sex to the right. We allowed porn to be the teacher of sexuality, rather than us saying, we should teach sexuality. We should teach what healthy, connective, loving, tender, delicious sex is. Instead, we allowed pornography to be what most of our boys think sex is, right? So in the context of this morning, we were talking about when you get into a situation like the one that's in the play, and you've been learning about sex through porn, you don't even know that you're crossing a boundary because you've seen that boundary get crossed over and over and over again in the pornography you've been watching. And I think for me, if I had the world I wanted to be living in, we would be teaching sex education from a very early age. People would know what healthy touch is, they would know what consent is, they would know what the rights are to their body, they would know what pleasure is, they would know how to pleasure themselves, they would know how to ask for what they need, they would know how to say stop, everyone would respect boundaries, and all of that would be something we taught. Rather than pretending it's not happening, denying it's happening, so that all of this pornography gets to be what goes into the DNA of our children, and this prudishness, which masquerades as caring about people, but actually puts people over and over again in harm's way because they don't know the rights of their body, and they don't know how to say no, and they don't know how to protect themselves. So I don't think there's anything more important than sex education. I really don't. Is there one more? Yes, there's a question here.
Thank you. Thank you, V, so much. Tonight was really incredible. But I have to say, like, I want to now turn to my friend Carole. I'd like to ask Carole, now what? Like, for 100 episodes, you've made me a lot smarter, and you've really, like, opened my mind. And it's been really wonderful. And so let's turn it back on you.
Yay, good idea.
Wow. I don't know what to say, really. I love to know about how people reinvent themselves. And that was really like a big focus of the early part of talking to people. And I talked to you about that. I've talked to a lot of people about that. And I think connected with that is like inspiration. Okay, how do you reinvent yourself? How do you keep yourself inspired? How do you keep those good feelings coming? My mother would call me like a nervous halalia. I don't know if you ever heard that term, but So I'm always looking for people to like, hey, that's fun. You don't have to be nervous about that. That's like fun. Have a good time. And I get so much inspiration from the people I talk to, like this woman here who is thought so much about things and has so much to teach and so much to say. So, and of course, and people like you who really help me, educate me, talk to me. I'm really grateful. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to talk to people and to hear what they have to say and what inspires them. And thank you for that.
And I also think, Carole, what you do is that you, I think you have a way of digging into the places where people could stop and could end, but where something happened. You know, you're always looking for that, what's that turn in the road, right?
Yeah.
And I love that because it's like that's what we all have to keep thinking about, because it's so hard to be alive right now. I don't know about all of you, but I think it's very hard to be alive, particularly in this country right now, particularly in the world. Like, and just to find that part that you're like always seeking for that. You're like a little heat-seeking missile. Like, what is that part that's gonna? And I so appreciate you, and I so appreciate your curiosity, just your general curiosity. I've watched you for years, just, you know, following it. Thank you.
I'm very touched. I want to thank.
This man had just one last
Okay,
thing.
go ahead.
He had his hand up. I had
Okay.
said, sorry.
No.
Wait, this one.
V, thank you for everything you've said tonight. We're swimming in this fire hose of fear and division and binaries that's being promulgated by the media and the cultural landscape at large. How do you think about breaking out of that and countering that message and bringing more positivity and connection to the world?
That's a good question. You know, we were talking this morning about, somebody was talking about allyship. And I was saying that I didn't really like the word allyship. I didn't really like the word ally because there's some implicit hierarchy in it. Like it's like white people being allies to black people in their struggle to deal with white people, right? You know what I mean? Like, we're actually the problem. We're not allies. We're the problem, right? In the same way that men are allies to us in stopping sexual violence when they're the ones raping us. Do you know what I mean? And I think what I'm really working on and thinking deeply about in this, I'm doing a lot of work around what is apology. What does it mean to really apologize as practice? What I'm really beginning to discover is, what is solidarity? What does it mean for me to understand that your advancement is my advancement? Your pain is my pain. Your sorrow is my sorrow. There's no separation. That I have to step into whatever that is and hold in myself whatever that is. So we're in this together, as opposed to, I'm going to help you out with your problem. It's our problem. And I think part of what the media does is it puts everything in bins. You know, it's like it categorizes and it binarizes, and I don't even know if that's a word, and it just like choo. And I wanna say, I'm sitting next to you on the train. What's your story? You know, I know your story is connected in some way to my story. Every story is connected in this whole amazing mandala of human beings, right? And where do I keep separating myself out? Where do I keep putting up a wall and going, but that's not my story, my story. Can I close with one story? Do you mind? I was working in a correctional facility for many years at the Bedford Hills Correctional Facility. I was running a writers group with long-term people who were there, women who were there long-term who had done violent crimes, which means most of them there for murder. And in the initial days, I would interview women, and a group of women would come in and we'd talk about their lives from 1 to 9, from 9 to 15, each week we'd go. And I loved all the women in this group so much. They were all amazing, except for this one woman who I did not like. She gave me the creeps. Everything about her scared me to death. She was there for sexual abuse of a child who had died. And she just scared me, and I had a whole story about her, and I had no empathy for her, and I just like, ooh. I just had an ooh. I had an ooh, right? And so the second group, she sat next to me, and I was like, oh my God, she's sitting next to me. This is going to be like, you know. So everyone was going around, they were sharing about their childhoods, and of course it was horrible stories of people being abused and whatever. And we finally got to her, and everybody in the group had been sharing about how they'd been raped or molested as a child. And we got to her, and she sat as a sex toy for the first 10 years of my life. I was sold out by my parents. I was sold out to their friends. My stepfather and my mother used me, and then my mother died, and then my stepfather married me, and then he sent me out to get children to bring them back for him to molest. When I came to prison, I didn't know why I was here, because there'd been no framework of morality to compare anything to, so I didn't know what I was doing wrong. And I don't think you should ever let me out of prison, because I don't know that I'd ever be able to function in the world. I have to tell you, I started to cry. I couldn't stop crying, because I realized I'd made up a whole story about this woman. I judged this woman, I determined this woman, I wrote her off just because how she looked. And I made a decision after that to really do my very best to say, every story runs through me. Every story runs through us. We are part of each other. So how do I live every day without putting up those walls, without putting up those binaries, without saying, I'm good, you're bad, because we know that's not true. We're all good, we're all bad. We all have a shadow, we all have a, right? And how do we serve each other? How do we connect with each other? How do we love each other? Because that's what love is. And how do we do it each day in every encounter that we make? Not just in the broad, but every encounter on the subway, every encounter on the street. How are we being part of each other as opposed to separating ourselves from each other? It's the only work I think is worth doing, you know. Thank you, Carole.
Thank you,
Thank
Eve.
you. Love you.
I just want to say before
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
I wanted to thank people. I wanted to thank Melanie McNair, Elise Shoreland, who helped me so much, Tony Montieri, Nixie Avada, who has been with this podcast since the beginning, my husband Steve, who had to live with the nervous Holalia, and V, who is, as you have heard and seen, an amazing person. So thank you all for being here, and let's go buy her book, because it's really good.
Thank you, Carole. Thank you. Thank you. I love you.
So yes, go buy the book, go out the back doors, and then come back in through those doors to get in line to have your book personalized and thank V face to face. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you. Where do I go? Show me where I'm going.
Let's take your mics off.
Oh, okay.